So this morning, as we get ready for our celebration of Christmas tonight and tomorrow, we get an opportunity to step back for a minute and focus on Mary. Perhaps you noticed that our psalm was not really a psalm, so to speak. It didn't come from the book of Psalms in the Bible. It came from Luke, Mary's song of praise to God when she meets her relative Elizabeth, mentioned in the reading just now, who was also expecting a child in her old age after she had not been able to conceive for most of her life. And as the two women greet each other, they both exclaim wonderful praises, and the psalm that we have this morning was Mary's, was to come to be called the Magnificat. After the first word, my soul magnifies, enlarges the Lord. And that was our psalm for this morning. And then, of course, the reading from the Gospel, Gabriel's appearance to Mary with some news that for us from the distance of 2,000 years is good news. From the value and the advantage of hindsight is certainly good news. But I think if you were Mary, it might not have been good news initially. And I want to just take a moment to focus on Mary, who unfortunately, you ever think if you could have Mary over for coffee, and have a conversation together about what has happened in the intervening 2,000 years, just to her and her reputation, she would be scratching her head like, what the heck? I think that would be her reaction, because she has become a figure of controversy even in the church, especially. Who venerates Mary, who doesn't venerate Mary, who venerates her appropriately, who worships her, who doesn't worship her, all the kind of what place does Mary have, and what's appropriate, and what does God intend? That's the big question, right? Always in our minds. What does God intend? What does God want for us in terms of our relationship to Mary? I think if you had her for coffee, she'd probably be like, wow, what the heck? You people are nuts. I think maybe you should say that. She's too full of grace for that, I suppose, to confront us with our sometime religious insanity. No offense, anybody. I'm right there with it. But if you notice, and I'm not asking you to read it now, but the icon on the cover of our bulletin this morning is an icon of Mary, and inside, Lynn Beard has wrote up a lovely description of what that icon means, and she mentions this word that has become very closely connected to Mary, and that is Theotokos. Theotokos, which is a Greek word, and it means God-bearer. It's a pretty simple word. It simply means God-bearer. And Mary gets this title in the church of Theotokos because she, of course, bore God into the world in the person of Jesus, who we as Christians believe was fully divine. So Mary does become, through her active willingness, Mother of God. And as Lutheran Christians, we affirm that reality of Mary's status as well. So she is Theotokos, the God-bearer. But, we kind of get stuck between, and this is especially relevant these days, the view of women in the church, and you've kind of got two choices in Christian history as women. You've got two choices. You can either be like Mary, not right because of her amazing grace and her willingness as a virgin to be the mother of God, right? How many of you women here are the mother of God? Yeah, my mother wouldn't say that either. So I heard that you can tell that Mary was Jewish because she thought her son was God. So you have one choice, not a real choice, that is to be like Mary, or you have the other choice, and that is to be like Eve, who led the whole human race into sin and death. Cool being a woman in the church, right? Mary or Eve. But I want to focus instead on Mary's role as Theotokos, and perhaps even more importantly, Mary's role as a disciple. As a disciple. Because I think sometimes the veneration and the distance that we put between ourselves and Mary is not helpful to us in terms of having someone who can be an inspiration to us in our own life of faith. And one of the keys to that is the fact that when the angel Gabriel comes to Mary and says, hey, God's got a plan for you. God wants you to bear Jesus into the world. God wants you to be the vehicle for God to do a new thing in terms of God's relationship with humanity. Mary's response, if you notice carefully, as Luke tells this part of our history, Mary's response isn't, okay, cool, let's do it. Right? Did you notice that? Gabriel comes to her and says to her, hail, favored one, the Lord is with you. And Mary's initial reaction is, that's a weird way to say hello, right? She's like, okay. Immediately, you get the sense that she's on high alert. Like, this is not a normal, everyday encounter. And she's ready. What does this mean? And then Angel Gabriel unfolds the plan. This is what's going to happen. And again, Mary doesn't say, okay, cool, let's do it. She says, like, wait a minute. Time out, Gabriel. How can this be? I've been with a man. We've been like, what's going to happen? What's the plan? And what I like about that, especially, is that Mary is engaged. She's engaged in the relationship that God is trying to create with her and through her for the sake of the world. She is not passive about this proposal that God has. She has questions. She's perplexed. She wonders what's going on. And she says to Gabriel, how can this be? So one of the descriptions that Luther gave to Mary, I think this is interesting, because Luther had a very close relationship to her. But he says, in his explication of the Magnificat, he says, putting these words into Mary's mouth, I am only the workshop in which God operates. And with all due respect, I'd like to take exception with the blessed Dr. Martin. I don't think Mary saw herself that way, as only the workshop. Any of you guys like Iron Man movies? Iron Man? No? I saw them. They're pretty cool. Special effects were outstanding. I think we could perhaps think of Mary like Jarvis. Remember Jarvis? So if you haven't seen the Iron Man movies, I guess I have to bring you up to speed. If you haven't read the comics, Tony Stark is this brilliant creator of things and this industrial CEO and powerhouse, and he's just very creative. And he decides that he's going to create for himself, and I won't go into all the details, but he's going to create for himself a suit that will give him essentially superpowers. But it's all from his own creation. He develops this suit of armor that helps him to fly and be intervene on behalf of humanity in good ways. Right? And Tony Stark is the creator. He creates this suit, but he has this artificial intelligence butler named Jarvis. So he says to Jarvis, I want to build this suit, and he shows Jarvis what he wants to do. And Jarvis actually is the entity that builds the suit, along with help from Tony. And together, they create Iron Man. Right? If you haven't seen the movies, they're really cool. And there's no sex, right? I have to thank you. Second. See the first one. But if you see the movies, you'll know what I mean when I say that Mary is more, in my mind anyway, like Jarvis. Gabriel comes to her and says, hey, God has this plan. I want to create something. I want to do something new in my relationship with humanity. I'm gonna come in and take on human flesh and walk amongst you and give you the straight word from me. Right out like that. And Mary's like, okay, how are we going to do this? And Gabriel says, well, here's the design. And Mary isn't just a workshop. She's a participant. She is with God a co-creator of this new reality. She becomes engaged and involves her whole self in this. Because then, after the concern and the sort of confusion that she initially greets the angel with, and then she says, how can this be? What she says at the end is, here I am, the servant of the Lord, let it be with me according to your word. That's when Mary says, okay, I'm in. I'm in. Let's do this. And she becomes that co-creator with God of this new reality that's going to bring Jesus into our lives. And that's why she gets that word Theotokos. She doesn't just bear God in her body. She bears God in her spirit. She bears God in her willingness to be used by God to do something new. I was reading another author who had, I think, something very beautiful to say about Mary. His name is Timothy George, and he writes, Mary was a disciple of Christ. Get a load of this. I think it's really cool. Mary was a disciple of Christ before she was his mother. Right? She was a disciple before she was his mother, for had she not believed, she would not have conceived. Her willingness, right? Here I am, the servant of the Lord. And Mary's faith is not the achievement of merit, but the gift of divine grace. Mary was embraced by Emmanuel, God with us, long before he came into her womb. Mary's embraced by Emmanuel, God with us, long before he came into her womb. That's what prepared her for being willing to cooperate with the angel when the angel showed up. Because she already was on the lookout for God, right? In a sense, she was already the God-bearer before she became the capital T, Theotokos, God-bearer. And I say that that's why Mary becomes an important example for us of what it means to be a disciple. Because each one of you has the opportunity and the baptismal calling to be Theotokos, God-bearer in your life, in your relationship with other people, by the way you carry yourself, by the way you treat other people, by your care, your love, your concern, by the values that you hold dear and live out in your life. In all of these things, if you think of yourself, right, as Theotokos, which is gender neutral, so it refers to anybody. If you think of yourself as God-bearer, then the things that you say and do, the values that you hold, the way you conduct yourself, that all becomes informed by the fact that you are, like Mary, a disciple who has already been embraced by the Holy Spirit. Already. One of the things that this author goes on to say about us being God-bearers is this. In his grace, Emmanuel has been at work in us long before we knew him. Which is one of the reasons we Christians baptize babies. Because we believe that God is already at work in that child. And the baptism becomes a public acknowledgement and an infusion of that grace into that little baby. Right? Luke is just infused with grace. And God is at work with him. And you can see just the way he's so happy to be here in church. But that's why we baptize babies. Because God is at work in us long before we're even aware of it. At least in a way that we can speak about and be conscious of. So Mary becomes an example to us of discipleship. And now you have lots of choices. You can go out there and you can introduce yourself to people as, hi, I'm Theotokos, or hi, I'm Jarvis, or hi, I'm Mary, or whatever helps you to understand that God is active in your life for the sake of the transformation of the world. And God has been active in us long before we were even aware of it. And that we truly are, in the way we live and move and have our being, Theotokos, God-bearers to the world. Amen.